Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Sital Kalantry is on the phone. She has authored a book called Women's Human Rights and Migration, Sex-Selective Abortion Laws in the United States and India. This is a fascinating topic, and I'm not even going to try to condense it for the sake of the introduction. We'll learn everything we need to learn from Sital. Let me just tell you a little bit about her. Her credentials are rather impressive. She's an expert in international human rights, gender and education rights. She's a clinical professor of law, the director of the International Human Rights Policy Advocacy Clinic, and the co-director of the Migration and Human Rights Program at Cornell Law School. Sital Kalantry, it's an honor to have you on our show. Good morning.
Good morning, Larry. It's a pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
Where are you right now?
I'm right now in balmy Ithaca, New York.
Oh, okay. Balmy. Well, that's nice.
Yes. It's wishful thinking. It's always
Well, whenever we talk about human rights and we try to champion rights for those of us who live in this country, in the United States, we do have our problems, but sometimes we forget that the rest of the world is on a different page completely, and many of those people end up moving here. So how does your report, your book, address the problem specifically with abortion?
Yeah, so what my book tries to look at is how we make laws and regulations in regard to immigrant women, people who move here, who've been here for generations, in the United States in particular, and how what happens in other countries impacts the laws we make here. In some ways, unfairly and inappropriately, we need to look at exactly what the data is in this country. And the focus on abortion is this. The idea is that places like China and India, and I don't want to generalize, but there is a trend. Some people want to have a son, at least one son. In China had a one-child policy for a long time, and now they've relaxed it. India doesn't have similar policy, but people will learn the future sex of their fetus and would abort if they've already have one girl, and let's say they want to have a son. And the legislatures in the United States have I think inappropriately assumed that people, when they come to the United States, are also undertaking similar practices and at similar rates as they do in foreign countries.
Really? And based on what? What makes that assumption? How do they come to that conclusion?
So, just to give you a by way of background, more than half of U.S. state legislatures have voted in the last 8 years on laws to prohibit abortion if a woman wants to do so because she doesn't want a child of a certain sex. And some legislatures actually have also passed laws to prohibit abortion if there's a disability in the fetus. So if a woman doesn't want to have a severely disabled fetus, you're no longer allowed to do it in certain countries, and in certain states. Arkansas and Indiana, for example, are the most recent states that have done that. Florida hasn't passed such a ban. And what happened is that there was a study that came out in 2008 that found that when certain groups, their study involved Indian, Chinese, and Koreans, have one girl child, their second child is more likely to be a boy child than comparing it to Caucasian Americans. And the third child is even more likely. Now, the study was very narrow. It didn't actually say how many people might have been involved in it, but and again, it's only based on 5% of the census. We're not exactly sure if, in fact, this is happening or how it's happening, but according to study, maybe over the lifetime as of the 2000 census, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 extra boys were born in the United States among these people. And they've taken this data and misunderstood it, right? So this goes out into the media, and people now think this is a crisis in the U.S. In a place like India, we're talking about maybe 50 million fewer women than there should be, right? And India is a big country of 1 billion people, but 50 million is a lot. Here we're talking about maybe 1,000 or 1,500. And again, this is old data. Our new data actually shows something extremely different, which I can talk about. But based on this sort of misinterpretation of a small finding, you have, a movement that very strongly feels in the United States that abortion should be bad. They take up this issue and start to use stereotypes to, all women.
How does their mistake manifest itself in a negative way?
What do you mean?
Okay, I'm trying to figure out the problem here. If our legislators have created laws based on a mistake that they've made, in other words, these the Asian women are not aborting children based on the sex of the child they're about to deliver once they move here, right? Am I right so far?
Yeah, they're not doing it at any kind of great proportions if they are, right? In the U.S., gender selection is possible through IVF and through sperm sorting. So it's nothing of a crisis proportion that
Right. Okay, so I got that part right. So if there are laws being written because they mistakenly think that it's bigger than it really is,
exactly.
What problems is that causing? Maybe does that make sense?
So let me answer that question. So here is give you an example in Arkansas. In the Indiana law was let's use Arkansas. Actually, the 2017 law requires all doctors to ask everybody. So a woman goes into to get an abortion, the doctor must say, "Oh, do you know the sex of your fetus?" And if she answers yes, then he or she can't perform the operation and has to, however it's going to happen, can't provide the service and instead has to delay the service and seek the prior medical records of the doctors. So organizations have sued Arkansas, and they've actually won, and currently there's an injunction against the law which says this is just an unnecessary delay for all women. And some other states, again, require you to ask all women, well, what are the reasons, what are you seeking? So in a way it sort of vets, it's just creates, and it will put the doctor in jail if the doctor somehow performs an abortion unknowingly or knowingly that this is for the sex. So it burdens the relationship and creates unnecessary inquiries into the what's happening.
Is this done? Are the women on their own choosing this, or are the men that they're married to forcing them to find out the sex of their baby, and then this could lead to, like, under the umbrella of domestic violence if they force them to do this?
Yeah, I mean, if it's forced, this domestic violence, it's illegal in the United States to force anybody to have an abortion, and it should be. Nobody should be forced to do anything. So, in a place like India, which I know a lot about, there is a lot of family pressure for a woman to have a son. People want inheritance. People want for various reasons. Girls are expensive because of dowry. But in the U.S., people aren't paying dowry when girls are married. Here, women have a lot more economic opportunities. There's, some level of equality. So people's behavior is a little bit different. Girls, the Asian Americans, when we surveyed them, they've said they want both boys and girls. So it's not that it's actually happening. It's that it's assumed to be occurring, laws are passing, and then now legislatures, doctors have to be asking questions to all women and delay the process for women unnecessarily for something that's actually not a problem here.
So if you're a doctor in India and then you decide to move over here to the United States and, do your doctoring over here, are those doctors finding it difficult to adhere to the laws of the United States?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, actually in India, it's prohibited as well. It's actually prohibited to learn the sex of the fetus because they're attempting to stop the practice. And so there's no gender reveal parties in India. It's actually illegal. You cannot even know at any point. Of course, if the law is violated. So it's really not about, I guess I'm just, to clarify, I don't think it's a problem in the United States that's actually happening. And in any event, it's not a human rights concern in the way it is in India because it's not in massive proportions. People here, particularly serving Asian Americans and everyone, as I said, they don't have a preference for a son. They want both types of both boys and girls.
What is the general feeling, pregnancy or abortion or not? I mean, just in general, when somebody moves from the culture you just described in India to America, is it relief? Is it disappointment? What is the actual feeling of those folks who move here, especially a young couple that is of childbearing age?
Well, it's hard to sort of know individuals what they're feeling. But what I guess also I'm trying to express is that I think when I read the legislation and the discussions about it, there's an assumption made that when people who migrate from other countries, their culture doesn't change, right? So they can't. They do bring some aspects of their culture with them, but then over time, as you know, certainly when they give birth to people and people who are born here, they're changing over time, and they remain aspects of their culture, but then they take aspects of the culture that they go into.
Wow.
But I also that context changes, right? And what the book I'm trying to say is that context is so important in understanding when something is a human rights violation or whether or not it's discrimination.
Okay, and I guess I'm a little confused here, and I'm trying to figure out if the human rights, if those two words apply to the fetus as well as to the mother and everybody else.
Yeah, so I mean, the laws that are passed in these states, and they're also being considered in the U.S. Congress. There's always a legislation pending called PRENDA. And in 2012, the House of Representatives voted in favor of it. And, you know, allied to these are other bans, race selective and disability selection bans. So whether that really brings to light the important question you raised, well, does the fetus have a right to be free from discrimination, whether it's race discrimination or sex discrimination or even disability discrimination? Like, I mean, here you can't, it's illegal and one shouldn't discriminate against someone who has, a disability. But does that apply to the fetus? Now, that's in part a moral question and in part a legal question. Now, I can answer the legal question for you. Legally, the U.S. Supreme Court has never found that those rights exist in a fetus, right? And once, if you do find those rights, then it really is. If you think it's a full human being, then one should say, well, why should abortion even be legal? So, it currently
right. Yeah, I want to tell you a real quick little story. I'm against abortion, just to make sure you know how I stand on it. But I want you to know, and this is going to make me sound like a hypocrite, I'm also against changing the law. I don't think we should have a law making it illegal, because otherwise we're going to have the same problems we had before Roe versus Wade, which is, the back alley abortion clinic, that kind of thing. But I'm against it because it's real simple for me. I believe that we begin our lives at conception, and we can argue about that, and I'm not trying to set this conversation up to go there. I just want you to know where I stand. However, with that said, I wanted to tell you about a guest we had. She and her husband were very excited because she was pregnant. And the test, and this is an American lady, I believe she was in the Midwest, and she was going to give birth to a baby that was going to be severely disabled. I can't remember what the nature of this disability was. And they made the very difficult decision to terminate the pregnancy. And at the time we talked to her, she had a baby. I could hear it on the phone. Remember this conversation?
Yes,
I do. And so the baby that was born maybe 2 years later, I don't remember, was born healthy. And so there's a part of me that says, oh my gosh, I hate the fact that you terminated a baby. But at the same time, I was hearing what she was saying, that she was going to be raising a child that had no life, basically, that had to live with tubes in it the rest of his life. At least that's what the doctors told her.
Yeah.
And so she made the very difficult decision. So I kind of took a step back and I thought, I don't know how I feel anymore. I was confused with my own convictions. And I haven't even asked you your position on what you're talking about yet, and I will get to that. But in listening to what you're saying right now, I have a hard time putting a person who's aborting a baby because of sex in the same category as the woman who aborted the baby because of a disability.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'm not, and I say it in the book, I'm not particularly in support of it either. I don't think anyone should abort for the child, for the sex of a child. I think it's a problematic. I take it very seriously. Although I agree with you with the law, I think it should be legal because I think it empowers women. It's an equality issue. It's an issue about it changes a woman's life if you don't have that control in a very negative way over one's body. But so in theory, I agree. It's more really a question of if it unnecessarily burdens other women who aren't actually seeking it for this reason. That's kind of my point, and it expands an inquiry in an already hard decision. It delays a process, and ultimately, this question about whether you asked about the legal question, this legal question is going to be heard at the appeals court level, the Seventh Circuit, which is a Midwest court, is reviewing the Indiana statute that bans, again, both disability selection, like you just said. That woman, if she lived in Indiana, couldn't have that abortion and would have to give birth to a baby was going to be raised with tubes. But it's the same thing. It's reason-based, right? If this reason, we're going to say you can't do it for this reason. We're going to say you can't do it for that reason, but you can do it for this reason. So once we start making those exceptions for reasons, we're creating all these holes that ultimately will erode the entire right, and it goes to it hasn't been decided yet by the U.S. Supreme Court, and that this case could go there and say, okay, well, state's allowed to say this reason's okay and that reason's not okay, and then try to inquire about what the reason is that the woman is doing it.
Was your aunt one of the catalysts in the way you become so passionate about this?
Well, I just was, having as somebody who was born in India, came here when I was young, and I spent a lot of time both personally and professionally in India, and I sort of spend a lot of time here, as you can tell from my accent. It seemed to me that the two scenarios are so completely different, and I just wanted to be sure that people here, when they are thinking about these issues, when they're passing these laws, when they're passing judgment on what Asian Americans do, and reading data, that they should know that the scenarios are so completely different, and the people are so completely different, and there are different motivations in India that exists for wanting a son that don't exist in the U.S.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. I think I finally understand what you're saying, and the intricacies of it probably would take a while more, but. So I don't know that understanding it though necessarily makes me in favor of it. I don't know. I hear what you're saying that we being against abortion in general makes it hard for me to agree that we should allow somebody to say, yes, I'm going to have a boy, but but I'm going to have it aborted, or girl, but have it aborted. I don't know. It's kind of a strange topic, but I hear what you're saying, and I hear the dilemma in your voice. For the women who want to have the abortion.
Yeah, if it's prohibited for one reason, then why shouldn't it be prohibited for the other reason, right? And for a different, now there's also you can't abort because of a race, and that's really just a complete fraud. Nobody really aborts a fetus because of its race. I mean, the race of my fetus probably won't change unless I'm having a different partner. So that's just really stigmatized.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, we're making it seem like it's a bigger issue than it really is. I wonder if it's an issue at all. I wonder how many people in this country have actually aborted a baby because of the sex or perhaps the race.
Well, I don't think for race it would be very little to none, because the idea is that the reason these laws are passed is because legislatures purportedly are worried about the disproportionate rate of abortions among African American and Hispanic women. So it's really hard to believe that an African American or Hispanic woman is discriminating against her African American fetus. It's more just, that's really mind blowing and more stigmatizing to those women.
Well, you talk about France also with their laws.
Yeah.
Prevailing.
You're right. I kind of brought that up in the book as just to show another example of how context is so important to understanding human rights issues. Countries, as you know, in Europe have banned, including France, several other countries have prohibited a Muslim woman from wearing a full face veil. So if she wants to cover her face, you can't do that anymore in public. And my point was that I think some of those laws were driven to enhance women's equality, saying, well, you're in an unequal culture, and so we're not going to let you do it because it oppresses you. But that may be the case, or may be true in certain countries where it's required. There are certain countries that actually require you to veil or wear the burqa, and historically, it keeps women out of certain important places that they should be able to do and go. But in France, many women who've been interviewed are women saying, well, I'm wearing this because it's my culture, it's my identity, and those are the reasons I'm doing it.
That's that's a much easier, more comfortable topic for me, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, they should be allowed to wear the burqas if they want to. I don't see a problem with that.
Right, but France, Belgium, and many other countries, and the European Court of Human Rights has explicitly said the women have they don't have a right to wear the burqa and the full face veil. They said that France has the right to ensure that everyone can live together, and denied them this. So that to me but it shows the same idea of people using information and stereotypes about what happens in foreign countries to influence laws in these what I call migrant receiving countries. And I similarly don't want people to do that with respect to the discussion of sex-selective abortion. Now, you might be opposed to it, and as I say in my book, have a conversation about that. Let's not have a conversation about there's a crisis here and Asian Americans are aborting people.
Right. Oh, I hear what you're saying, yeah.
So we can, and once we take that out of the equation, I feel we can have a healthier conversation. And the conversation we should also ask is, why is it legal, to gender select with sperm sorting? Because it assumes that there's only two genders. People have other problems with, feminists have other problems with assuming that you can even control what sex your child will be. So there are all these other important questions that are not talked about.
I guess here's my thought on that. If you can control the sex of your child by sorting out the sperm, then you're taking care of your wishes before there's actually any conception.
Yeah.
And it's in my mind, in all due respect, Sital, I truly believe that once conception happens, you may disagree with this, and I know I've spoken to religious leaders who disagree with this. So we have religious leaders in this studio who said, no, life happens after birth, not after conception. Yeah. I disagree. That's just me. But I do think the sperm sorting probably is a little different. It's still sex selection, but.
Right. Well, what about IVF? Because that happens.
I don't know what that is.
An embryo is formed, and in a petri dish, and then there's a little piece taken out to test whether it's a male or a female, and then only the male or females are implanted in.
Wow!
Oh wow! Yeah. Gosh. Oh my gosh! I haven't thought about that one enough. I didn't know about that, Sital. Obviously, you have though. I applaud you for your courage, for what your position is. You're obviously a well-spoken representative for this cause. The book is getting really good reviews, so a lot of people obviously are on your side with this one. I'm actually on your side with this one. I'm not in favor of abortion, but I'm on your side as far as, in this country, freedom should be freedom, period. And we got to do something about educating people so that people don't get pregnant when they don't want to be.
Exactly.
That's, to me, the education that needs to happen.
I agree with you. I'm not here. The book was not about making for abortion or not. It was the case is it's legal in the U.S. and I come from a different perspective. From the feminist perspective, I believe there's reasons for it to be legal, but let's talk about not passing laws based on the decontextualization.
Powerful conversation, Sital Kalantry. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us today, and I'll let you get back to your balmy weather up there in upstate New York.
Yes, 20 degrees is a heat wave for us now. So
oh my gosh!
I found the book on Amazon. Do you have a website you want to direct us to?
Yes, there's a website. You can find it on Amazon and other books. My website is kalantry.lawschool.cornell.edu.
Okay, and that's Kalantry for those needing to know, and we'll put that up on the link with the podcast as well. Sital, thank you for being on the show with us today.
Thank you, Larry and Robin. I appreciate your conversation.
All right, we'll be right back.